The luxury car line was idling, a slow, metallic crawl through the deluge. Inside the Bentley, Arthur Vance, CEO of Vance Holdings, checked his custom watch. He was already 10 minutes late for his own Ascend Fund charity gala. He was detached, annoyed by the rain, and utterly insulated in the comfort of his privilege. Suddenly, a small, dark figure slammed against the car window. The valet, trying to be efficient, violently pushed the person back. Maya Davis, 9 years old, stumbled but immediately righted herself. She was soaked, shivering, and clutching a manila envelope that was dissolving in the rain. Her face, small and determined, was a mask of cold fury. This was not a plea. This was a confrontation. Arthur watched the incident through the tinted glass. The valet, a large white man, was actively shoving the small black girl. It was a jarring image of power, class, and prejudice. He quickly lowered the window. What is going on here? Maya ignored the valet. She thrust the disintegrating envelope at Arthur. Ew, she shouted, her voice shaking but clear. You run the Ascend Fund. Read this. You keep saying no. Why do you keep saying no? Arthur took the wet application. It was marked multiple times with the stamp. Application denied. Young lady, I'm late for an important event. My mother has chronic kidney disease. Maya screamed, the rainwater washing tears down her face. She's sick. She needs a home with stable heat. We applied 3 times. You know she needs help, but your papers just say no. Tell me why you keep lying to us. The raw, desperate emotion pierced Arthur's corporate shell. He looked at the child, realizing her visible suffering was a direct consequence of his organization's failure. What is your mother's name? He asked, his voice low. Sarah Davis. And she's coughing right now because our apartment is freezing. You're stealing our chance. Arthur glanced at the grand hall where his guests were waiting. He looked at the drenched, defiant child. The choice was instantaneous. He opened the car door. Get in. He pulled Maya inside, the little girl dripping onto the leather seat. He handed her a dry cloth. Maya, I don't know the answer, but I promise you I will find it. Where is your mother now? He had to defy his entire schedule. He spent the next hour at the tiny, cold apartment of Sarah Davis. He saw the reality. The peeling paint, the thin blankets, the visibly ill woman trying to smile bravely at her terrified daughter. Mr. Vance, Sarah whispered, her voice weak from persistent coughing, we've always been honest. I don't understand why the initiative keeps rejecting our paperwork. We did everything right. Arthur, sitting in the cold living room, felt a chilling certainty that the fault lay not with the application, but with his corporation. He saw the systemic rot. He returned to his Vance Holdings executive office, bypassing the furious calls from his board members about his absence. He summoned his head of forensic accounting. I want a full, immediate audit of the Ascend Fund operations. Arthur ordered, his voice sharp and controlled. Specifically, cross-reference all applications rejected in the last 6 months against internal fund disbursement reports. Focus on anomalies in the housing subsidy category. The next morning, the report hit his desk. It was worse than he feared. Forensic accounting revealed a consistent pattern. Applications from the most vulnerable demographics, single mothers, veterans, the chronically ill, were systematically flagged for rejection, often citing minor administrative errors. Simultaneously, millions of dollars intended for those subsidies had been diverted through complex, layered transactions. Mr. Vance, his accountant, reported grimly, we've tracked $1.4 million in misdirected funds just in the last year. The money isn't going to legitimate partners. It's being routed through a shell company called Orion Solutions. Arthur stared at the report, the shame of his previous detachment burning into him. He had seen the problem on a balance sheet. Now he saw it on Maya's freezing face. He immediately called Evelyn Thorne, his vice president of operations, the executive who oversaw the charity division. Evelyn, I need you in my office now. Bring the full documentation for the Ascend Fund's subsidy disbursement. Evelyn, sharp, polished, and utterly composed, arrived. She feigned surprise at the missing funds. Administrative errors. Arthur, it's a complex system. We have thousands of applications. I'm sure the discrepancy is a simple accounting mistake or a late-filed receipt from a third-party vendor. No, Arthur stated, his eyes fixed on her. It's not an error. Or Ion Solutions. Do you know who owns it, Evelyn? Evelyn's polished composure faltered for the first time. A flicker of cold fear crossed her eyes. She quickly recovered. I believe it's a vendor partnership recommended by our former legal counsel. They're a data management firm. They're a shell company, Evelyn, owned by your brother, David Thorne. The mask dropped completely. Evelyn Thorne, the trusted executive, the picture of corporate efficiency, looked cornered and vicious. You can't prove that, Arthur. My brother runs a legitimate business, and you are risking the integrity of this entire corporation. Our stock price, over one isolated audit. You stole from the sick, Evelyn, Arthur said, standing. You stole from Maya Davis. That's not an isolated audit. That's a moral crime. The situation exploded into a full-scale corporate crisis. Arthur immediately presented the forensic report to the Vance Holdings board, expecting outrage over the moral breach. What he got was cold, surgical anger, not directed at Evelyn Thorne, but at him. You conducted an unauthorized investigation, Arthur, risking exposure. Mr. Hamilton, the board chairman, stated coldly. The issue here isn't the theft, it's the reputational risk. We manage the optics, not the morality. We are talking about $1.4 million stolen from veterans and children. Arthur argued, slamming the report onto the glass table. Our entire ethical framework is compromised. We need to inform the authorities, recover the funds, and compensate the 87 affected families immediately. The board stared back unimpressed. We will not inform the authorities, Hamilton countered. We will resolve this internally. We propose offering settlements to the affected families, a lump sum payment, well above what they would have received, contingent on a confidentiality agreement, NDA. We protect the shareholders and the integrity of the Vance name. The proposal was chilling. Silence the victims with money, bury the truth, and protect the perpetrator's accomplices. Arthur felt his stomach churn. This was the moment where corporate cynicism became outright corruption. I refuse. I will not pay NDA money to bury a crime that victimized the poorest people in the city. I choose justice, not reputation. Then you leave us no choice, Arthur, Hamilton said, his voice flat. You are relieved of your duties as CEO, effective immediately. You are placed on administrative leave, pending a full review. Your access to all corporate files is revoked. We will handle this discreetly. Arthur stood, gathering his few personal belongings from the executive office, a few photos, a leather journal. He had lost his company, his title, and his immense salary, but he had finally found his moral center. He met his external allies that same afternoon. Marcus Chun, a sharp paralegal, and Zara Khan, an investigative journalist with a national platform, were waiting at a discreet downtown location. They stripped me of everything, Arthur admitted, handing Marcus a hard drive containing the complete audit and Evelyn's internal communications. But I have the evidence. We need to go public immediately. They want silence, Mr. Vance, Zara Khan said, her eyes intense. They want the story to die in a boardroom. We'll make it a national headline. But we need victims who are willing to talk, not just take a check. This was the key. The policy of silence could only be broken by the voices of the victims. Arthur went directly to Maya and Sarah Davis. He sat down in their small, freezing apartment again, stripped of his power, his face marked by loss. My company offered you a check, Arthur explained, looking at Sarah. It will solve your housing crisis immediately, but it comes with an NDA. You can never talk about the fraud or the people who stole your money. Sarah looked at her daughter, Maya, who was fiercely clutching her hand. That money will pay for the new house, Sarah whispered, her face etched with exhaustion. It will pay for my medicine. It will keep Maya warm. Maya looked up at Arthur. But what about the other families? The veterans the papers talked about? If we take the money, they don't get justice. They just get silenced. Arthur knelt before Maya, placing his hands on her shoulder. Maya, your mother needs that help. You have every right to take that check. Maya shook her head. Her face was set with the same fierce resolve she had shown in the rain. "No, we refuse. We are not for sale. We fight for the truth." Sarah looked at her daughter, then at Arthur. A slow, painful determination filled her eyes. "My daughter has more integrity than your entire board, Mr. Vance. We refuse the settlement. We fight." The courage of the Devises, a single mother and her 9-year-old daughter, was the unbreakable core the movement needed. The Devises' refusal was the spark that ignited the public confrontation. Marcus Chun, the paralegal, immediately filed a mass action lawsuit based on the audit evidence Arthur provided. The story spread like wildfire. Zara Khan broke the Ascend Fund scandal nationally, using Arthur's leaked internal reports to highlight the board's attempt to silence the victims with NDAs. The narrative shifted from simple theft to corporate malfeasance and moral betrayal. The movement gained momentum. Arthur, operating outside the corporate fortress, met with victim families. He told them his story, how his own blind ambition had made him complicit, and how Maya's courage had redeemed him. The 24 families who had the moral fortitude to refuse the settlement formed an alliance. They were a diverse group, a disabled veteran, a retired teacher, several single parents. They became the face of the fight for accountability. The board, initially dismissive, was now facing a catastrophic public relations crisis. Vance Holdings' stock plummeted. Arthur's sacrifice was proving far more damaging to the company's integrity than any attempt at silence could have been. The climax arrived with a dramatic public hearing convened by federal regulators. The room was packed with press, analysts, and the 24 families standing together in solidarity. Arthur, sitting outside the protective circle of his former company, looked dignified and resolute. He had chosen the path of exile, but gained moral authority. Maya Davis was the final witness. She walked to the stand, small but utterly composed. "Maya, can you tell the court what you asked Mr. Vance that day in the car?" The prosecutor asked gently. Maya looked directly at the regulatory panel. "I asked why he kept lying to us. My mother wasn't just a number. She was sick. We needed help. And they took the money. They let us suffer." Her testimony, clear and heartbreaking, humanized the abstract crime. She wasn't just fighting for an apartment. She was fighting for the dignity and recognition of every person the system had failed. The public outcry was immense. The regulators announced a full federal investigation. Evelyn Thorne and her brother were arrested at their offices shortly after the hearing, facing multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The board was forced to issue a humiliating public apology and announce a full review of all internal governance. Arthur watched the arrest on a small TV screen, no longer feeling anger, but a somber sense of vindication. "It ends now," he whispered. The aftermath was revolutionary. The recovered funds were immediately disbursed to the 87 affected families. Sarah Davis was moved into a new, safe, heated apartment, and her medical care stabilized. Arthur's moral stand had broken the board's power. They had no choice but to beg him to return, but not as the old CEO. He returned with a new, uncompromising vision. He demanded a complete overhaul of the Ascend Fund structure. He and Marcus Chun led the reform. They created a participatory governance model, establishing recipient advisory boards composed of community leaders and former aid recipients, including Sarah Davis. The new structure ensured that the voices of the vulnerable were the ultimate authority in policy decisions. Arthur's legacy was finally secure, not in the billions he made, but in the systems of compassion he built. The systemic reforms at Vance Holdings became a national model for corporate philanthropy. Arthur Vance was no longer defined by his late arrival at a fundraiser, but by the courage he showed in tearing down his own company's corruption. Arthur remained at the helm, but his focus had fundamentally shifted. His life was now centered on the Ascend Fund, ensuring its transparency and expanding its reach. 5 years later, the Ascend Fund was a thriving, transparent organization, audited publicly and run with integrity. Sarah Davis was healthy and working part-time, no longer burdened by fear. The story culminated with a hopeful visual. The setting was a bright, expansive auditorium. Arthur stood on stage, addressing a foundation event. He looked directly into the camera. My career was once about building an empire. But a little girl taught me that the only wealth that matters is the kindness we show and the trust we earn. When my company chose silence, Maya Davis chose integrity. She showed me that the most powerful voice in any organization belongs to the person who has everything to lose. He looked into the audience, his eyes settling on a young woman, smiling brightly. The camera focused on Maya Davis, now 14, radiant in a cap and gown at her middle school graduation. She was happy, secure, and thriving. Her future, once stolen by greed, was now brightly restored. After the ceremony, Arthur found Maya. "Mr. Vance," Maya said, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you for coming." "I wouldn't miss it, Maya," Arthur replied, his voice full of warmth. "You are the reason this foundation exists. You are the reason I'm standing here today." "I just wanted to make sure they heard us," Maya said simply. "They heard you, Maya, and now they listen." He handed her a small, elegant pin, the logo of the Reform to Send Fund, featuring a compass. "Keep guiding us. You're our moral compass." The final scene was a quiet vow. Arthur stood by the window of his now less sterile office. He had learned that true leadership was not about building fortresses, but about dismantling walls. His commitment was permanent. The Ascend Fund scandal ultimately launched a national conversation, leading to legislative changes for independent audits of all major corporate charities. Arthur and his allies continued their work, ensuring that the systems meant to help were finally structured to protect. The final legacy was written not in stock prices, but in the restored dignity of thousands of families who finally received their second chance. If this story of corruption, courage, and corporate redemption touched your heart, remember, hit subscribe now to support stories that hold power accountable and champion integrity. Like this video and comment below. What is the most powerful change Maya's courage made to Arthur's life? Share this story to remind others that listening to the most vulnerable is the ultimate business imperative.